Hey, what's up guys? Chip Walters here again with another tutorial continuing on in our endeavor to try and bring models from the NURBS and CAD field through SketchUp through 3D code into Unity. And we'll explain all of that as we go. So as you recall, we left it here with a little bit of a tutorial on shading and normals excuse me, and why that's important. So as we move forward, I'm going to show some more examples, and you may want to take some notes because there's a lot to go over in this particular session. First off, let's go back to here, and as you recall, we saved this out as an OBJ, and we saved that as a SketchUp. So let's actually import that OBJ directly into Unity. So we do new, paint, click here. We're going to go to this OBJ. Okay, and then here's one of the issues that we're going to run into. Notice I'm trying to treat materials in separate textures. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, it may be that I want to be able to manage different levels of details on different faces or different objects. Like I have a small box, a medium box, and a large box. I may want to put a lot more detail in the small box than on the medium box, and so I don't need the same resolution. And I could always do that by setting up my UV maps, but I'm trying to do a more automated workflow. So I may want to have 3 different UV maps here for this one object. So I'm going to hit OK. And as I pull this in, we'll see that it did not, as we previously found out, it did not create 3 different maps. It only created one. I think this is a bug in 3D code. But as you can see, our actual UV map actually looks pretty good for this. So I'm going to leave it the way it is because it came in automatically UV mapped, something that's typically rather difficult to do. I like that. Now, we do have our smoothing problems, you can see. And let's go ahead and paint some textures on here. We'll put red up here, RG, and let's do blue. Oops. Blue down here. So now we have our 3 maps, and now we're ready to save this into actually, before I do that, let me go ahead. I'm going to take and I want to paint a bump there. As you can see, let's actually do this a little bit. Bump depth 100%, so we can, let's just use a brush. I'm going to show you something why this is important here. Okay, so I'm going to put a bump right here. You can see there's a bump. There's a bump map. Of course, because it's a bump, not displacement, it gives us kind of a look of what it's going to be. So actually, let's use this brush instead. There. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'm going to say File, Save, and I'm going to save this in our Assets folder inside of Unity, and I'll call this one Test 1, and this is from MoI. That's where the normals were generated, the smoothing normals were generated. So we're saving it as a 3D file, as a 3D code file. So here's our object. The other thing I might mention, actually, let's do one more thing here before I get too far down the road. Let's go ahead and calculate the occlusion for this. So now we have a little bit of, you can see there's a little bit of shading down here, and then I'm going to save that. Okay, so now we save that. So now let's go back into Unity, and we're going to actually load this up. Actually, I had a previous model in here that's no longer in here. I'm going to delete that and put in, this is the test DW. That's the one we don't want. Okay. And this one. And this is the one we just imported. So you can see right away It comes in and it's a little bit blobby. There's our normal. Notice that we also are seeing our occlusion maps are already on there because they're baked into the actual file. So if I go into this map, notice that a couple things. One is that this is one object. I've got one mesh. Here it is down here. You can see. So this is not a good workflow if what you want to do is create a bunch of different meshes and explode them or do something out. In that case, you're going to want to use an OBJ workflow like we talked about earlier. But the other thing about this is, remember I talked about touching the textures. So I need to go into this blue. There we go. Now I've touched it. Now, wow. You can see what happens when you're smoothing, your smoothing values are off. Now the other thing to notice is that anytime you import something from 3D Code, our normal map is going to be way too high. So let's put this as 0.1, and now we can see that it's a little better. It's a little better of a model, but it's still very doughy and pillowy. We can see our bump map coming up a little bit. So there's really it's really a trade-off in this. When I start adding more normals, you're starting to see now some creasing along these edges. So that's why I keep that particular normal map on a highly reflective surface down pretty low. So the other thing to notice is that we have an occlusion map in here, and we can turn that on and off, which is kind of nice. One of the things when you export an OBJ, you're going to find that you want to make sure that you don't export, you don't have the occlusion map turned on. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's in here you want to, when you export OBJ, that needs to be turned off, or else you're going to bake that into the diffuse texture. So if you want to, like I said earlier, and we're going to do this here in a second. Matter of fact, let's just do that right now. Let's export this objects and textures, and we're going to export it into a folder. Let's see, new folder, and this is a test 2. Okay, and I'll call this test 2. So what we're doing is we're going to import, save this, excuse me, as an OBJ in there, and everything else we're just using pings so we can look at them a little better. But you could use the default T targets if you wanted to. Use source positions. Okay, I'm putting all that in there now. As we come in, we'll see that here's our test 2 folder, and let's look at it this way. And here's our object. But now notice in our object we have, yes, we've got 3 different meshes, and they're all separately. So I can come in here and put this in at let's just set this one at 0, and this one we need to delete. That's no longer there. And this one we're going to set at 0 also. So nicely, this came in, and you can see each one of the objects. So if I double click on this, there's our object. Let's move it over out so we can see the 2 different objects. Okay, again, we're not seeing the proper mapping here, so let's go into our materials, and we can touch those, but you'll notice as we touch those, nothing's happening. I mean, that's because, look, we don't have a normal map. We don't even have a metallic map. So we can go in here to test 2, and that's our height, that's our metallic. So I'll go into my material, or actually, I'm sorry, that's not right. I want to leave the materials in that folder. I'm going to take these and move them into test 2. Now, okay, so now I have the materials. So I have the blue one, and I'm going to take the metallic. Let's see, this is the height. Metallic is that. So we go to the blue one and put the metallic in there. So now you can see it. Notice that there's our height map or bump map on that right there, that little circle. Okay, so the blue one, the green one, we're also going to put the same metallic on, and the red one we do the same with the metallic. So we have all those set up nicely. You can see they're looking pretty good. You'll notice that in this case The OBJ, the smoothing's a little better, but that's because of this normal. So if I go in and I add this normal red one first, and the green one, oops, the green one next, and the blue one last. Okay, so now we have some pretty ridiculous normal maps. So we got to fix it. We hit the Fix Now button, and green normal map. So it doesn't. So basically fixed all the normals on there. So now you can see that we're getting a better overall. We're getting a better example of what it is, what we're looking for when we import. Notice that there's a crease here on this one. Now I think if I go into this object and I just basically turn off, there's a shader. If I just zero this out, I will get, I'll lose all of the artifacting, but what I also lose is I lose this bump. So I would say that one of the advantages of using the OBJ workflow is that not only do you get, it looks like you're going to get better texture mapping, but you're also going to get your normals looking a little better. And lastly, of course, you also get the ability to separate your objects, right? So the other thing I might mention is that if I look at my blue and I want to look at the occlusion, so I can add an occlusion layer. So you can see now we have an occlusion layer here. But if I go off and separate this object, if I go and separate this, you know, I don't want to show that occlusion layer anymore, right? So I can go again into my blue map and I can basically delete it or just turn it down to 0. So that's another advantage of using the OBJ workflow. So the 3D coat workflow is somewhat nice as well, but and more convenient, but it doesn't really necessarily work better with some of the normal projections. So let's keep that in mind. Now, next, what I want to do is show you how you might edit that. So I'm going to go in and choose, instead of that blue, I'm going to use more of a purple, and I'll put that on this, and then I'm going to take a brush, and I'm going to smooth this out a little bit there, and then let's add another one over here. So I'm going to put another blob of some kind over here, and then I'm going to say File, Export Objects and Textures. I'm going to leave everything exactly the way we had it before, and say OK. Okay. Actually, let me change that 1 second. I'm going to turn on the ambient occlusion here. You can see that here. So File, Export Objects and Textures. Okay, so now we'll save it. Okay, so now a couple things to point out as we go back in here. One is, look, it updated nicely and did a good job for us. But what it didn't do, what it also did is it added that ambient occlusion in the diffuse. So if I take the occlusion out of this, you see it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. If I want to, I can go back into the blue and add that inclusion and then bump it up, and it's just going to make it darker. It's going to give us more inclusion. But the point is that as you get ready to do this, what you're going to want to do is make sure when you export, you want to turn off that occlusion layer if you're exporting it for Unity, so that way you can manually add it in later if you want to. Okay, so I'll save this back in, and we'll go back, and now you see we have no export. So this is good and fun. So let's continue on, and let's see if we can't get better looking objects. So remember we saved this out. Well, let's do this real quick. So select all, and now let's export this as a SketchUp file. Okay, and we're going to use the same. We're going to use the same settings, meshing settings. Here we go. Oh, the file's open in SketchUp. Hold on, let me. Notice how much more organized our breakups are. That's because it's not triangulating them. It doesn't need to do that for SketchUp. SketchUp doesn't need triangles. So Unity does, and SketchUp will take care of that when it exports an OBJ. So now that this is done, here, file, open, here it is. Okay, so there's our objects. Now, one thing to notice here about this is that we want to, in this particular case, we're going to want to separate these objects. So to do that, I'm going to basically go in here and say, I'm going to group, make group, triple click, make group, triple click, make group. So I've made groups of all of these. And then let's go into our materials. Our color's named, and remember it's RGB, so I'm going to put a red up here. Oops, red here, green there, and blue here. So now we've got those. And now I want to say File, Export to 3D Model, and I'm going to call this TOE SU OBJ, and export all of that. Now we're going to go back into 3D code, and we're going to import what we just exported. Okay, it's going to actually automatically map everything. We've got 3 different objects. Now remember, the last time we tried to import 3 different objects and merged them all as one. See what happens this time. Okay, so now notice, now we have all 3, red, lime, and blue. Okay, so, but look at our look at our maps. They're all over the place, and that's because SketchUp does a really terrible job of converting this. So let's just really quickly go into our UV area. This is the first one which is selected, red, lime, blue. We select the red one. We're going to auto map that, fix it over there. Let's select the lime one. Let's auto map that, fixed it. And if after you auto map, you can maybe pack UV if you want. It'll rearrange them a little better. There we go. Let's try pack, shuffle the pack. Yeah, it looks like that's about the best we're gonna do. Maybe you can do auto scale. Sometimes that helps, but so we'll just leave that, pack UV, and then let's go into blue and let's auto map it. Oops, wrong. Where was it? Auto map. Sorry, used the wrong button. There it is. And then let's pack the UV on that too. So that looks pretty good. And now we just go to the paint room and say OK, and it's going to basically rebuild all of our maps. And now we have each one. So now let's go ahead and grab some colors. Blue. Oops. Do this is the fill button. Blue. Red. And let's see, green. Okay, there we have. So we have our mouse. Now you can look here, and you can even look at the shading now, and the shading is much more exact as we talked about. So let's see how this works when we export out to 3D code. So first I'm going to go File, Save As, and the last one we saved in test, it was this one. So I'm going to say test 1. I'm going to call this one, instead of MoI3d, I'll call it SU. This is the SU for SketchUp, okay? And let's go back into 3D code, or into Unity, and I want to turn this off. Okay, I'm going to turn this off because this is comparing the direct export from MoI from the export from Unity. So let's go into that. I'm going to go back into my test folder, and this one is the MA one, and this is the SU one. So let's do that, and let's put it at 0, and we'll move it out of the way. We didn't put a bump map on it, but that's okay. So again, we're going to have to go in, and we're going to have to actually touch the colors, and just by tapping on each one of these, it gets them where they want to be. But now look, well, it was pretty nice. Now we're getting this extreme faceting going on. So to fix that, we can go into each one of these and take that normal map and put it down quite a bit. Whoops, let's see. Or delete it altogether, but I'm gonna. Oops. and then this one here. So now we have, you can see that these objects are really much more like the objects that we had created. We have this nice smoothing across these areas, and they're flat on the side. And that's exactly more accurate to what we were trying to do. Now, you may say these look more realistic, but when you start building high resolution uh, models and importing them, you're going to want this, not this, in order to get the most realistic views. Because if you've got a lot of triangles going very subtly moving over a surface, you're going to see every single one of those triangles is going to flicker. So that's why this is important. So um, now let's look at importing the OBJ versions, right? So that means that we're gonna import it so that we have here's our back into we want to import so we have separate objects, different objects. Actually, let's go ahead at this point. Let's go ahead and let's calculate it. Let's make our AO map onto here. There it is. And I'm going to turn that off because when we export this, so file, I'm going to basically say export objects and textures. This is all good, except we need to give us a folder test. So test 2, this is, we'll call this test SU OBJ. Okay, we'll call that one there, and SU OBJ. Okay. Remember, we left ambient occlusion off, even though we can use it. Also, the other thing we might do while we're here, and we're building a, whoops, let's put it on this one then. There you go. We'll just add a little there. Okay, so we're good with that. Okay. Back to Unity we go, and we're going to import some new ones, and this is the test 2, and we have these materials, and I'm going to take these and move them up into this. Okay, so here's our objects is right here, and we're going to move it over, and I'm going to turn off, I'll leave that on. Let's turn this one on. Okay, this is our other OBJ, and these two in the middle here are the ones, these are our products that are basically the 3D code files. This is the one from the direct NURBS MoI input. This is the one from the SketchUp OBJ input. And then this one, of course, is the one we just did, which is an OBJ from SketchUp. So you'll find that as we go through this real quickly, let's tap it. Let's touch each one of these to make sure they've been touched. Now notice that, again, we're going to need to assign. It's a little bit of a lengthy process for over here, because we're going to need to assign, for this green shader, I need to assign the albedo, or not the albedo, but the normals, as well as the specular. So hold on while I do this quickly. Okay, now we're back. So now we've got them mapped correctly, and you can start to see that we basically drilled down and knocked off the normal map in this particular green one. Let's adjust that a little bit. Here's my normal. Let's make it 0.2, and there it is right there. So you can see the normal pops in on this one. By the way, you may notice, but there's a lot of different coloration in some of these. Of course, I've made the colors differently in some of them, so that's probably why that is. But Why I was going to mention that is that you always want it under project settings, under player, you want to make sure you have linear and not gamma set there, just FYI. So, okay, so now we have, and if you're going to separate them, then we can do that. Don't forget that if you separate this, then you need to go turn off the occlusion maps, like for this one. So you see that little dark area over there. I'm going to take that occlusion, turn it all the way down. So in separating it, you want to make sure you do that. See the bottom of this? It's got an occlusion map too. So we'll go into here, turn it all the way down. So let's talk about each one of these very quickly. First off to note is that when you're exporting directly out of NURBS as an OBJ and you import it, you're going to have you may have a problem with smoothing. So I hope this helps. Any one of these workflows are valid, just so you know. I'm just trying to give you some insight into some of the different things that you're going to have to run into.